All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to our first and digital edition of Diversity in Finance. You probably heard about this event through one of the organizing student societies that you can see on the screen, Corporate Women Association, Capitant Brussels, or Binabi. We're really happy to have this very different perspectives on diversity. And in a minute, you'll hear more about what our associations do exactly. So as you may know, tonight we will touch on very different topics in diversity. The position of women, the position of minorities, corporate perspective. We will talk about things such as numbers, what corporate culture really means, and what are microaggressions, for example. Before I go any further, I would like to share the structure, the event for tonight. So this is going to be our agenda for tonight. So yeah, in a minute, each organization will briefly tell you more about their functioning and their goals. Then our speakers will introduce themselves, and we will then go over to the actual panel discussion where I invite all our speakers to intervene, even if the question is not directly directed to them. For the audience, I really invite you to write down your questions in the chat box, although there will be a Q&A session at the end where you can unmute. For now, your cameras will be off and you will be muted, but at the end, we will unmute you. So yeah, so without waiting any longer, I will give the word to CWA's President, Kat Lambrecht.
Thank you, Noemi, and good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for attending. The whole CWA team is really happy to see this many people being interested in the topic of diversity in the financial sector. You might be asking yourself at this point, what is this organization called CWA? Well, we are Corporate Women Association, a Brussels-based organization of motivated students that want to improve the position of women in business. We truly believe that gender equality in business starts at the grassroots level, much before women get our first jobs. By organizing workshops, panel discussions like this one tonight, company visits, roundtable discussions, we are actively building awareness, skills, and networks, and are working towards more gender-balanced businesses and sectors. We want to engage young women with fulfilling work and aim to bring competent and confident women to the workforce. But to reach this goal, inclusivity is really the key word. We need everyone aboard, regardless of their gender or background. We can move to the next slide, please. One of the sectors where lots of improvements can be made is the financial sector. Even though out of all employees at Belgian banks, 51% are female, only 25% of all executive positions are occupied by women. At CWA, we are 100% committed to increasing that number. And this panel discussion is an important contribution to that. We at CWA are honored to have Claire Goding with us tonight, the speaker that we invited for this panel discussion. Claire, we are curious to hear your take on the topic of diversity in finance, and I am very, very positive that all of the people attending here tonight are too. And I would now like to give the floor to Daniel, the Vice President at Capitant Brussels.
Thank you, Kat. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel, the Vice President of Capitant Brussels, and also one of the members who got involved in the organization of the event on diversity in finance. So perhaps allow me to briefly introduce to you what Capitant is all about, since not all of you are Capitant Brussels members. So essentially, Capitant Brussels is the largest finance student society in Belgium. We have Okay, sorry. So to continue, we are the largest finance student society in Belgium, and we operate in 5 cities, Brussels included. So essentially, we target students who are passionate about finance and who are keen on pursuing a career in the field. So in order to help our members achieve the right skills for a prospective career in finance, what we do is that we organize a variety of finance themed events, which vary from workshops, conferences, panel discussions, M&A case competitions, finance trips, and also investment games. And perhaps some of you already saw that yesterday we started to advertise our investment game from this year, for which you can already register if that's something that you would like. And the best part of it is that we partner up with top financial institutions, consulting firms, as well as other public and private sectors in Belgium, together with which we get to organize all our events. So I would say that being part of Capitan provides you with both learning and networking opportunities. So perhaps you wonder how you can become a member. There are two main ways. You can either register via our Podio form, which you can access through our Facebook page. We created a sign up button for you, or you can directly register on the Capitan website. And the subscription costs €5 a year, and it includes 4 main benefits. You get a Capitan goodie bag, you get prioritized access to events with a limited capacity. You also get finance internship announcements and also a certificate, which depends on how many events you attend throughout the year, and which of course can be very valuable in terms of extracurricular activities. And finally, of course, in case you have any questions about Capitan, don't hesitate to reach out to us on our social media. And to end this introduction, I would also like to thank Stefan Garaleas, who's Capitant Brussels speaker for tonight. And we will mainly discuss with him the corporate perspective on diversity in finance. And I would like now to give the floor to Fabrina, who's the Vice President of Binabi.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Fabrina Lutajengwa, Vice President of Binabi. What is Binabi, you may ask? Binabi is a student association at ULB, whose main goals are to promote all different African cultures through various events, conferences, workshops, and to fight against prejudice and discrimination Afro-descendant people face on a daily basis. As a student association, we also aim to improve social integration of our members. We offer academic and professional support through our events, but also in collaboration with our alumni circle. Last but not least, we are developing and encouraging friendship between students of all nationalities. Indeed, Binabi was at first a Congolese circle, but throughout the years, we grew to a much larger community. If you're interested in Binabi, or if you want to join our community, feel free to contact me or us on social media at Binabi ULB on Instagram, or I am Binabi on Facebook, as you can see on my slide. Thank you again for your attention. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. I'm looking forward to this discussion on diversity, and I would like to thank Maya again for being present tonight. I'll give the floor to Noemi and our panelists now. Thank you very much.
Great. So without waiting any longer, I will ask a warm-up question that I direct to all of our speakers. A really simple question, but sometimes not so straightforward. What is the relationship between diversity and inclusion? What are the differences? Can one exist without the other? Does anyone have a first take on this?
I would love to say a few words if you allow. So, hi, I'm so happy to be here and excited to be here with you. There is a very well-known sentence where people say diversity is inviting everyone to the party and inclusion is when everybody starts to dance. But personally, I don't think this goes far enough, because at a certain point, do we not need also to have a shared impact and decide together about the party and about the music on which we will dance together? So that's something which goes even further. It's thinking to associate all the persons, the whole diversity you have to the decisions, the decision-making process.
Noemi, I think you're muted still.
Very sorry. Thank you so much, Claire, for your great take on this. I know that you have a little presentation for us. You have the floor to tell us more about yourself. Afterwards, Stefan and Maya will introduce themselves too.
Excellent. So I will go just through a few slides. Actually, so my name is Claire. I've been a diversity and inclusion manager for the biggest banks in Belgium the last 10 years. And since 1.5 years, I've joined the sector. So I've joined Febelfin to really, on an active way, improve diversity and inclusion in the financial sector. Not only on gender, we will see this immediately. We can go further on the slides. So I will say next each time. So first, I would just like to tell why are we as a financial sector active on diversity and inclusion. As you mentioned, the figures are not yet there. So yes, we have more than 50% women globally, but yes, in terms of levels of executive, it's not enough. And on multicultural inclusion, yes, we are still very white and not enough multicultural. But why is it so important for us? It's important in terms of clients, in terms of maximizing the collective intelligence, maximizing innovation capacity, improving risk management, being able to attract and retain the best talents, even if they don't look like the talents we already have, and having a more inclusive culture to all, also to the white hetero guys aged 45, for instance. Next slide, please. I will not take too much time on this one, but it's extremely interesting study from Eric Larsson, which shows how much the quality of the decision is improving if you improve the mix. So you see that a homogeneous panel, same generation, same origin, same gender, only takes the best decision in 58% of the cases. And this can improve and with gender, and by combining gender and generations, and especially by combining gender, generations, and origins. Next, please. What I want to show you today is, yes, we are actively building networks, a network of banks and financial institutions, which is called Women in Finance, which you can find on LinkedIn, and which on next Thursday will reach its 40th members. So we will be 40, and in total, we represent already 90% of the sector. That is really dedicated on gender. And then in July, we launched the Multicultural Bankers Network. We are focusing on measuring glass ceilings, measuring the figures, but also analyzing the culture. And I will mention both. We do this to be able to share the results with the CEOs, but also much widely with the companies, the HR, the communication people, the employees, but also and especially the student who may think, oh, is the financial sector something for me? We are also preparing a huge inclusion campaign for beginning of next year to reduce the risk of racist, sexist, or homophobic microaggressions, and this with a whole toolbox which will be shared with the whole financial sector. Next, please. This just shows it's too complex to go into details, but we analyzed the practices of all financial institutions, including, of course, KBC, the institution of Stefan, which we'll talk just after, and to know a little bit what is already well developed and on which we must put more emphasis. Next, please. But what I want to show to you is, for instance, how we measure glass ceilings. So we developed a way to show where the glass ceilings are. So we help companies in the sector to analyze very thinly all the levels of a company to understand at which exact levels they are starting to lose the women. Because once you discover that, you know how you can act. Next, please. And then I will show to you a few results of a survey which we launched in last June on multicultural inclusion in our sector. We got more than 800 participants. As you can see, a good balance between men and women. Next, please. And also a good balance of different origins. So a huge majority, 69% of colleagues of Belgian and Western European origin, but also 9.3% colleagues of Sub-Saharan Africa, 7% North Africa, Asia, mixed origin, Turkish origin, and so on. And with this spread, of course, it was totally anonymous. We asked a few questions, and I just want to show you 3 to 4 of the answers. So next, please. We first asked to the people, do they have the impression of having a slower career? And here already we see that colleagues who identified as Black or originally from North Africa, half of them say they have the feeling of having a slower career. It's all about perception here. Next, please. The second one is also very, very interesting because we asked to them, do you think that the recruitment campaigns and efforts to be multicultural are successful enough? And here we can see a huge difference between the Belgian and West European reaction, where they say globally, 75% of them say, yes, you are doing great, it's okay, while more than half of all colleagues with a different origin are saying this is not okay. Next, please. A very interesting one is when we ask to all people of all origins, do you want to really become an expert in your field? Here, we don't see any difference. Everyone wants to become an expert in his field. And that's, I think, a very powerful signal towards investing in everyone, not just in some groups. Next, please. And then this is my last one. We also wanted to know what the experience of financial institutions employees was about hearing sometimes, often, or very often racist microaggressions. And this slide I'm leaving just a little bit more because it's really worth being read. You will see that there are 2 groups which are answering much, much higher level than the others. And indeed, colleagues who are identified as Black or from North Africa, 2/3 of them do hear sometimes, often, or very often racist microaggressions, while this percentage falls to 1/5 for colleagues from Western European or Belgian origin. And the second question, which was also asked, was, does this impact your self-confidence and your career? And yes, more than 1/3 of Black colleagues and colleagues originally from North Africa say, yes, it does impact my self-confidence and my career. So this is all advocacy to act. I had the opportunity to share all these results and many more with all the CEOs of the banks a few weeks ago, and to tell them about the importance of their role to change this. So that was my short presentation. I hope I was not too long.
Thank you so much, Claire, for this presentation. I think this served us as a really great warm-up to dive into the topic of diversity. Stefan, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us more about your position as head of corporate culture. The floor is yours.
Sure, thank you. Good evening, everyone. It would have been nicer to see you in a full auditorium live, but okay, these are the circumstances. I'm talking to an empty screen with a few screens here, videos, but not everyone, obviously. My name is Stefan. I work for KBC. I suppose you all know it, but it's a major bank and insurance company in Belgium, but also activities in 5 more core countries, mostly in Central Europe. And actually, my title is Head of Corporate Culture. It might surprise you. I'm not a diversity manager, and that's a deliberate choice in our company since last year. They decided to put everything on diversity under corporate culture. And I will annoy you a lot tonight with the word culture because it's all we think is the basis of having a good diversity policy and exactly what you need in the company to achieve the results you want. From a background, I'm a lawyer from education. I worked for 15 years in the compliance department, so really the legal stuff. And then I decided a few years ago to make a total other switch, and I became head of corporate culture, including diversity since last year. So that's a little bit the introduction from my side.
Thank you so much. We're looking forward to hearing more from you later on. Now let's go to Maya. Maya, you have a really interesting background. Tell us more about it.
Good evening. I'm going to do my best to look like I'm looking at you. So I just finished my studies and started my first job in finance. So I studied business engineering, and now I'm a junior risk consultant at EY in the financial service subdivision, really, which was a conscious choice to go into consulting, really focused on just the sector as a whole. I also looked into banking and those things, but I found consulting a nice first experience to see how the sector works. So during my studies, I explored a lot of things to come to what I've now picked as my job. I was a founding member of Umoja, which is the equivalent of Binabi, but in Ghent, which was also a very interesting experience to see how other students also deal with looking at diversity when they're looking at the aula and in the classroom, as well as when we're thinking about the job market. I was also in student representation for 2 years in the Board of Social Affairs, and I was a youth representative for the Flemish Youth Council. So I've seen from a few ways how we look to also incorporate the voice of young people in decision-making at the university and policy level. That's a bit in short what I've done so far. So I'll be talking a bit more from the personal aspect, of course. I hope that my experience can also add something useful to anyone who's thinking about how to take this on when you go into working and exploring what you want to do. Thank you. And I already wanted to share 3 things that I might forget to otherwise say that I've learned in navigating the workspace and being a student as a woman and as a woman of color who identifies as Black as well. So one big thing that I have found is that it's so important to talk to people. I think where sometimes the issues of not feeling part of certain spaces come up, it's so good to talk to other people who are going into things that you want to be going into. I was also actively attending Capitant events in Ghent, and there I learned a lot from my fellow students who were exploring the world of finance. Second, this might sound a bit whimsical, and I decided to do it today, is to let your hair down. Speaking of the numbers on microaggressions and those kind of things, hair might be a thing that makes you feel a bit more self-conscious, but I have learned to feel as professional as anyone else with my hair in its glory. So this is a bit, it might sound whimsical, but it comes down to really feeling at home. And to touch on inclusion, I think that's really a big part of like not just being a diverse person in the space, but really feeling like you are included in the system and a part of it. And the third thing, when you're trying to figure it all out, you don't have to do it all. You don't have to be the most talented person to, as a woman or as a person of color, as a minority, you don't have to be overachieving everyone to get where you want to get. And that's a bit in short, and I hope that more can come up in the conversation that I can hopefully delve into. Thank you.
Without further ado, can you hear me? Can you hear me well? Yes. We'll start the panel discussion with you, Maya. My first question for you is, what is corporate culture for you?
I think corporate culture is just the whole of how people interact, how people act, and maybe this is not the correct definition, but that's how I see it. How things work in the workspace, it can go from small things, really the personal level, but also the way decisions are made, the way input is dealt with, how valued are you in your own role, whether that's depending on how hierarchical the organization is, how valued is your input, how are you being seen, can you speak up, etc. That's a bit how I see the corporate culture.
Could you tell us a bit more about your career path? For instance, what steps have you taken to build a career in finance, and what setbacks have you encountered along the way? Do you believe some of these setbacks were purely related to race or your gender?
Yes. So I'll try to keep it short how I came to the job I chose. I started my studies in business engineering more with the idea of going into supply chain, manufacturing, that side. But then I got to know more about the finance world, and then towards the bachelor, I learned more about the banking sector, within the classroom and outside. So I switched that lane a bit. I explored a lot. I went to a lot of events. I went to investment banking events. I went to events hosted by banks, by consulting firms, just to really feel it out, what I wanted to do. And to the point where I actually found my dream job. And that was actually the listing where I really thought, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do. Spoiler alert, this is not what I'm doing now, but I'm doing something similar. I had really found something that was very interesting to me, and the job description really resonated, but I think I lost out on it because the application process ended before I was ready. I took too long to apply. And I think in that sense, that is a part where the self-doubt that maybe I think I wouldn't have as much if I was not a woman of color. I would have felt very ready just when I saw the job ad and went for it. So I think in that aspect, that's one setback that I've had. In the grand scheme of things, everything was fine. But yes, I think that was one big one.
How does it feel like to be a minority in your workplace, especially?
I think in my current team, it feels good. I think we have a nice balanced team where everyone is, everyone can feel like a part of the team. So I purposely chose for EY being a rather international company. So with the idea of having slightly more diverse teams than you might have if I would go to work close to where I live in a very small company. So on my team, we do have a mix of backgrounds, a balance between male and female. So in that sense, it does feel like a good space to be working in.
I also want to ask, as a vice president of Binabi, why did you start Umoja, and what did you feel it was necessary to start such an association?
Yes. So the way Umoja actually grew was through social media. So there was a surge in tweets from people in Ghent and in Leuven speaking about sometimes feeling like the only person of color, the only Black person in your classroom. And that really resonated. Even from childhood, I've always been in hobbies, etc., where it hasn't been a very diverse space that I've been in. Which is no different when you're studying business engineering in Ghent. And I just found these people and we kind of connected through social media, and that's how we got the ball rolling on really going from just casually meeting. I think we met up 3 or 4 times in a really big group, and we remained with a core group that was really convinced that we had combined the skills and the eagerness to create a safe space for people like outside the classroom to really find, just a moment to let your hair down almost. So that was a really nice experience to then see how that vision really paid off. So we really created a space where we can have the cultural expression, and we also just have fun. We've had game nights, etc. But it's also, on the other hand, been a good way for other students and other student clubs to see that, okay, there is diversity in Ghent, and there are people who are joining Umoja who might be interested in their clubs, and it's been creating kind of this network and bridge in between. So that was really the motivation, both bringing the experience together for us as a non-homogeneous group as well, and then creating that bridge with all the wonderful student clubs that are already there.
How have you dealt with stereotypes in the context of your work, or misconceptions about a finance career as minority or woman? Did you hear me?
Yes, I heard you.
Okay, perfect.
I think in general, there is really that, of course, that stereotype of more finance being really a men's world. But when you get to the work floor, as the numbers show, you do realize, okay, there are many women here. So in that sense, I think when you get to the work floor and the workspace, the stereotypes, in my experience at least, it's not as much of a thing in the actual work experience, because you notice how many women are around you in that space. I think the stereotypes work more as something that might deter you or make you doubt, okay, is this really where I want to go? Do I see myself working in this space, in that sort of way?
Okay. Do you think that the modern finance workplace has sufficient policies in place to embolden minority female employees to climb up the career ladder? If present approaches don't work, what new ideas could company try, maybe?
Insofar as concrete policies, I think the fact that we're not seeing the numbers in the hierarchy levels is definitely a sign that it isn't sufficient. At some spot, I don't know from my experience. I know what a company could really do to do so. Because I think seeing people in the space that you're living up to, it does so much. So that's one where I think maybe Claire or Stefan have a better perspective on what companies can more add to that.
Okay. Lastly, what advice would you give to the younger generation interested in building a career in finance?
Yes, I think it really comes down to seeing, of course, where your interest lies and exploring. There's so many options for students. I think if you're studying economics or finance, you're very blessed that companies are literally ready to come to you. Maybe not all companies, and it doesn't mean that your path there will be easy, but really seeing what's out there, talking to people. When I was applying for jobs, I had a short list of my top 3 jobs when I applied. And I just checked on LinkedIn, okay, who do I know who's doing what I want to do? And I just sent them a message like, okay, could you tell me about your job? Can I call you after work? And the worst thing that someone can say when you're trying to get informed is no. So I took that. I had calls with everyone and found out what they liked about their job, what they didn't. And then I just figured out, okay, what do I need? And yeah, especially the network part is important, not necessarily to land you the job, but a lot to know what you're getting into and prepare. And then when you get it, just own it and just feel like you have your space there.
Okay, I also have another question. What advice would you give to your supervisor when it comes to recruiting minorities, female employees in the future?
I think a big one is to understand that there might be some hesitance in applying. And I say this without expecting someone from HR to really come to you and say, okay, let's let's do this job application together. But I think that hesitance can be a big thing in delaying someone like me to apply for a job. And once you know the company, that's fine. But it's, yeah, I think an event like this would be really good to create more of, because then you also lower the barrier. For instance, someone watching now today who wouldn't have thought of a certain job will already know the company and understand the people behind it a bit better. So I think it's understanding that there might be some different barriers that other people won't see that might make it harder to get those people to you. And also being inclusive in your communication is just a very big one. But I think if there are companies who aren't doing that yet today, then yeah, I think that's less likely.
Thank you very much. Does Stefan or Claire have something to add to what Maya have said so far?
Well, actually, I recognize the last thing you said about maybe your superiors don't always realize what's happening in your head or in other people's heads. And that's something I want to connect to later on as well. It's called, I would call it unconscious bias. Sometimes it's very specific. Sometimes it's just, yeah, not giving enough attention or not realizing certain things when you put yourselves in the shoes of the other side. So if you can create that already, and I think it's a major step forward.
Thank you. Claire, do you have something to add? I'll give the floor then to Danielle.
Oh, sorry. No, I was mute. Sorry.
Okay.
I didn't. My excuse. No, I was saying I totally recognize what Maya just said about lowering the barrier. And this is really something essential, because indeed there are, just as Stefan mentioned, the unconscious bias, but there is also the phenomenon of auto-censoring. Which people which are from minorities will not see enough role models to whom they can identify, and then they will think, well, I don't see anyone to whom I can connect, so probably I can't apply. They will not be interested in my case. So it's really, really important to reach out or to have role models which will be able to attract and connect with these candidates.
Thank you very much. I'll give the floor to Danielle now, who will speak for Capitants.
All right, thank you, Fabrina. Hi, Stefan, and thank you again for joining us for this discussion. I think it's very exciting to get a perspective from one of the leading financial institutions in Belgium. And I think a good start for our discussion would be to ask what's actually KBC's approach to diversity.
Yes. Well, to start with, I, of course, will give you a little bit the way how we approach it in KBC. It's a little bit specific. But before that, I wanted to start with a small video. I know I gave the organization quite a headache to put that in. So I hope it will work. I hope you will have sound. But if we can start with the video, that would be nice.
All right. That's what we're going to do right now.
I am Helen Taddasa Mogas. I was born in Gondar, a little town in Ethiopia. 5 years ago, I fled to Belgium with my husband and children. We crossed the Mediterranean Sea with small rubber boats and came to Greece. It was a very horrible experience. Then we lived in a refugee camp for months, and then we traveled by land through Serbia, Hungary, and to Belgium. Now, we live in a very small house with 2 other families. My friends are still looking for a job, but I'm very grateful that I got a chance to do this cleaning work, just to be able to make some money for my family. Did you really believe this? I'm Helen, that's correct. But I studied at the University of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia and at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. Now I am a data analyst at KBC.
So actually, this was a sneak preview of a campaign we are going to launch internally. Sorry for the last screen, it's in Dutch, but it was saying what did you think? And some prejudices or biases are deeper embedded than you think. And it was just a starting point to illustrate something that we actually put the whole diversity agenda under corporate culture. And I can't speak about corporate culture in KBC without mentioning PEARL. And that's actually the acronym we are using for everything connected to corporate culture in KBC. I'm not going to bother you with all the letters of the words because then I can speak for hours, and that's another part of my job. But one of the values there is respect. And just also to illustrate how important the whole corporate culture part is, I'm with my small unit of 5 people. Actually, I have a double reporting line, one to the HR manager and one directly to the CEO of the company, the group CEO. So from the start, when our CEO came in, he said corporate culture is really the basis of everything. And as Maya also said, it's a whole thing of behavior and things that you can probably not see, but what's happening underneath the surface. And if you can create the right corporate culture in your company, then all the rest, implementing strategies and all the values you want to implement, it will go smoothly. I'm not saying it's going smoothly at our place, but it's a daily work, it's a daily focus. So starting from PEARL, we defined that actually under the letter of respect, we actually want to treat everybody in a respectful manner. Everybody should be able to speak up for him or herself, and that we actually need an open mindset. And it's not necessarily connected to the so-called minorities or groups of people. It's actually for every individual. We want to be inclusive to everyone. And that's why we put it on a broader umbrella than the topic of diversity. So if last year I went to the group Exco to discuss this matter, it's always an interesting discussion to have there. They said, well, we are not even going to talk about the business case or the advantages. Claire mentioned a few advantages why you should go for diversity and inclusion. They actually blocked even the discussion. They said, we just believe in it. It's part of respect. It's part of a value. We are just going for it without any other proof or necessity of business value. Having said that, they also chose to go for a focus, and that's where we are maybe a little bit different than other companies. They said, okay, let's focus on gender diversity mainly because we have a long road ahead still to achieve, and partly also on generational diversity because we have our workforce with older people and also younger people. It's always a challenge to make them work together. Now, don't misunderstand me. It's not that we only focus on those two aspects, that the others are not important, because respect means, in any case, for everyone the same. So whenever we have cases of microaggressions or things which are going wrong, immediately there will be a reaction and there will be the exact answer to that in order to make it clear that this is not tolerated in our company as behavior. And we also have a network organization within KBC. It's called Diversity Rocks. And that's also a group of people who are very enthusiastic about diversity. And there they also connect on all types of diversity, organizing events and bringing people together. So that's a little bit the general framework. As I said, a little bit different than maybe all areas of diversity in scope, but the choice was to focus actually.
Thank you, Stefan.
Yeah.
Now that we have a clear idea of what diversity means to KBC, I think we could go further and perhaps ask you what initiatives has KBC taken to promote diversity, and furthermore, how do they deal with potential biases against the female and minority employees? And I think it's also important, are actually employees adequately informed about all these initiatives?
Yeah. Okay, this is a little bit an academic slide, but it looks more dull than it is in practice. Actually, we work in our model on these 3 pillars, and I will start with what's called there the right female resources. I don't even like that word, but okay, it gives an image. And today, okay, it's a battle to recruit the right people, but basically we are in a difficult period also. We are not recruiting that much because we are mainly focusing on preserving jobs. But when we recruit, we are actually recruiting on very specific profiles. And when we recruit, we are actually looking for female candidates, mainly for recruitment of specific jobs. Now, also the people we have on board, we stimulate them to get better, to also develop, and we also try to help them in that. But we also need to have on the leadership ladder people who also want to make steps forward. So that's a kind of cocktail or mix of prerequisites. But most important, the other two angles are management commitments. There, if you go to the next slide, we actually made a general commitment on diversity, as I said, respect as a basis and equal opportunity. So that's every manager. We expect them to apply that and also be aware of conscious and unconscious bias. So for that, we are starting a campaign. We made an e-learning, we made a video you just saw. But then we go a step further on gender diversity. And last year, EXCO, our group EXCO, asked all the senior general managers to define targets for the leadership positions for female candidates. Now, to give you an idea, because I can speak about that in a very general way, but we have, let's say, 7 levels below senior management. And in those 7 levels, we have looked at finding the glass ceiling, as Claire also mentioned, and it started as from level 5. So we have level 5, 6, and 7, where our senior management was asked to define action plans and to define their own targets on increasing the number of female leaders. Because actually our global target would be on level 5, 50%, on level 6, on the middle long term, 40%, and on level 7, so the highest under senior management, 30%. Now, you might say this is not so ambitious, this is not yet 50-50, that's true, but we come from a long path. And also what you don't want is that that people are taken out of their chairs if they function well, at least, just because of their gender. And you don't want that people are put in a chair just because of their gender. So we look at it realistically, but firmly. And so we ask from management to make action plans. And not all the action plans are the same, because IT is a very male, historically a very male environment. So there, the management of IT has said, okay, on the highest level, we have only 20% right now. We are going to do our best to increase that, but we can never make that jump on a short term to the 30% requested. So we don't want to apply the one-size-fits-all approach, because that would simply not work. And then on the next slide, actually the HR function as an underlying push, where we look at the different angles when we recruit people. Okay, I said it's a little bit less now in these times, but still we try to detect career ambitions at an early stage, so that if people express themselves, and especially female colleagues, okay, I want to move forward in my career, because not everybody wants that necessarily. We really try to detect that and to support and give support in the most early stage. When we recruit mainly on the STEM profiles, the IT profiles and the data profiles, we also, as I said, are looking mostly for female candidates. We also had a very interesting workshop together with Women in Finance on writing vacancies in a gender neutral way, because you sometimes, as a vacancy writer, you are also biased, unfortunately. And also to the outside world, our employer branding also wants to be open to everyone. Then from a learning and development perspective, obviously I mentioned it, it's the unconscious bias as an e-learning and a topic we want to make sure everybody is aware of. When we nominate top talents, we also look at gender balanced talent pipeline. That is also challenging. So whenever management is proposing top talents and we find as HR that there are not enough female candidates, we send them back to do their homework again and to come back with candidates from both genders minimum. And we also started experimenting a little bit with self-nomination, because you also see sometimes, and maybe it's connecting also with what Maya said, sometimes some female candidates consider that they are maybe not good enough, or I don't know, and they don't dare to show themselves to the management directly, to say like, I want to be a top talent, or I want to show off. So we also opened up as an experiment that people can nominate themselves directly. So to say like, oh, I would be interested. So there is a less bigger barrier or threshold for people to show themselves somehow. And last but not least, we have these corporate culture initiatives, the Pearl initiatives, where we want to put an angle of diversity in it whenever we can. And to conclude the HR process part, we have in our businesses HR business partners. And they are people from HR connecting with management. And basically what they do, they are taking always the focus for management on diversity as well. So they are there as an assistant or as an advisor to management from HR. And we see it works. So anytime there is a nomination to be done, or there is a decision about a promotion, HR business partners are involved. And whenever they see that management is losing focus on the topic, they are there a little bit as a mother-in-law with a bad comparison, to say, look, did you think about that or that person? Because that might also be an option. So I think focus is the key word to answer also one of the questions before, like what can companies do to further develop. I don't think there is a bad will anymore. I think everybody is convinced, but managers have also a lot of things to deal with on a daily basis. So sometimes they're biased, it's true. So then it's good that there are functions around them, showing them also whenever it's necessary to take a decision, to take the look at the angle of diversity. And then a last one I wanted to mention on the next slide, because it's not all fluffy and soft. We also created a so-called gender dashboard as a supporting tool for management. So whenever they don't know in their organization if they are doing well or not, with one click on a reporting tool, they can look at their population, their workforce from different angles on age and gender. And also there they have the opportunity to consult the data for their part of the organization. And another angle I wanted to add on the next slide is also our external communication. This is actually a story connected to that, but this was the image KBC put on their KBC mobile app on Father's Day this year. And you would be surprised how many reactions we got on that. And unfortunately, fortunately, many positive, but unfortunately also many negative reactions from customers saying, KBC, can't you act normal and put normal pictures on your mobile apps instead of this thing? And it would surprise you. It was not only from older people, but actually many people between 20 and 30 years old who also gave this type of reaction. So in this case, our social media team responded with a standard answer. Look, we represent the whole community, the whole society, our customers are diverse. Why wouldn't we put this type of images on our external channels as well? So is there one solution or is there one way to approach it? I don't think so. What we try to do is to put a good mix of all kinds of actions and initiatives. And your last part of your question was also, are the employees adequately informed about all this? And that's because I don't want to bring only a good news show. We have a lot of way to go. Basically, that's the thing. We are now looking at it internally, how we can show more the action plans and the commitments from management to the rest of the organization. And on top of that, we have a lot of questions from a sustainability perspective with rating agencies asking for disclosing whatever we are doing. So also there we are looking at how should we externally report about all the things, and especially about the figures and the hard data, because that's also a way how you can keep an organization moving forward in the right direction.
Thank you, Stefan, for giving us an overview of KBC's diversity programs. You already mentioned some of the challenges that come up with trying to implement diversity programs. So I would like to expand a bit more on that. And more precisely, I think that oftentimes when we speak about diversity, there also comes the question, how do you manage the tension between the need for meritocracy and the need for diversity in the financial workplace? And to add even more, a question that one of our participants asks, if we push a diversity agenda, we might end up making a positive discrimination for a certain group. And does that make commercial sense in the end for the company? Like, don't we want as candidate at the end of the day?
No. It's a lot, it's many questions in one topic. I think when I spoke about these levels, level 5, 6, 7, whatever, it's how we are organized. I didn't use the word targets. There is a kind of ambition level on a short term and a medium term, and you might say, okay, you're playing with words here, but not exactly. Our exco didn't say to all the senior managers, like the IT example, you have to reach 30% or 40% on that date. Because then what you are doing is you're pushing indeed towards positive discrimination, and you are actually, as I said a little bit with a caricature situation, you are not expected to take people from their chair and put other people instead just because of gender. That would not be the right way to move. So the question of meritocracy versus diversity, again, whenever we have somebody or an empty chair, and a decision has to be made, whatever level, if it's for general management or for a lower level leadership position. As I mentioned, the HR business partners will really challenge the manager to take all the candidates, all possible candidates into account. And yes, they will be pushed to take candidates from both genders into account. But in the end, if the male candidate is the right person for the right position, then there is no way it will be pushed to take the female candidate. If the both are equal or mostly equal, then yes, then the idea is to go for the female candidate. I also heard you speaking about the business value and make sure we are not going into another balance in the other direction. That's, I think, how we approach it. And again, looking for the right candidate on the right position, without going to one extreme, but taking all candidates into account and making sure every time a decision is taken, there is focus on diversity and there is focus on both genders at that moment.
Thank you for your insights. And I think this is an interesting question also, perhaps, to see if Maya or Claire have anything to add about the tension between meritocracy and diversity.
Yes, exactly. What I would like to suggest, for instance, and just a message to Stefan, I loved your small movie and I loved your picture. So, I mean, really, really a nice presentation. But what I would like to say here is, for recruiters, for team leaders who need to recruit someone, I do believe that there is a lot of sense in giving them as a habit to say, well, at first I need to see, of course, what competencies the new person joining my team must have, what competencies, what experience, obvious. But second, you can ask yourself the question, okay, let's have a look at my team, knowing all that we know about the importance of collective intelligence. How can the new candidate also enrich my diversity, the diversity of my team? So that is also having this different perspective, not only on, I would say, the whole company dimension, saying, yes, we need to really encourage women, of course, but on a certain way, if you have a look at your teams of HR business partners, for instance, there is a high possibility that you have plenty of women and that hiring men in these positions would really also improve this healthy mix that we need. In fact, I'm really always advocating for the mix, because really as a team leader, having a mixed team with people with different experiences, different backgrounds, generations and genders, it is improving the way you work. So really having that reflex of asking yourself that question when you are seeking the different candidates, you are just out of this notion of positive discrimination. You are saying, yes, this person, because she is a woman and because I do not have enough women in my team, she has a strong advantage which will make my team better. Or because she is from this different origin, she's bringing something very concretely to my team as well, next to the competencies.
Would you, Maya, have anything to add?
Yes, well, more a question than really something to add. I was wondering, thank you for the presentation, Stefan. It was interesting to see the barometer and everything. Do you think with gender diversity being the focus now and still some ways to go on that aspect, do you think you would ever see something like that, that type of measurement tool occurring with minority in mind in a company? I'm just curious to see if that's something that would ever be a thing in the future, how you see that.
No.
Yeah.
Well, indeed, I have to apologize or not, because that's our policy that I didn't touch upon the other aspects of diversity. Having said that, just to make it clear, whenever a senior general manager wants to put different accents in their part of the organization, adding some parts on diversity, then obviously they are free to do that and they are encouraged to do that. We have our retail network is also partly in major cities, of course. And in that case, recruitment is often done on specific cultural backgrounds in order to serve the clients better. If your customers are a good mix of certain origins, then it's good to have from the other side of the counter also a good mix. So I didn't speak about that because from a company perspective, okay, we put a different focus, but it doesn't exclude, even in the contrary, we know that we have, to give the example, the recruitment practices also for that part of diversity. Can we imagine to go further in the dashboards? As such, I don't exclude it, but there we have a data problem. We can't register anything. Gender is an objective element. We could always go on nationality, but nationality is not saying anything about origin or cultural backgrounds, not to mention sexual preferences. So we have a lot of data, or we don't have a lot of data. These are parts of data we cannot even register. So we cannot even make a dashboard like that. And so there you're navigating, if you want to do something, you're navigating on gut feeling, you're navigating on specific cases and on things that pop up where you see that it should be better, or on the survey, as Claire mentioned, because we also participated to that. So then you can measure certain things, but you cannot really put it into the data nicely and clean as we can do it with gender, actually.
In fact, there are two ways of measuring. So it is possible, but we do not really encourage it because it's more the public institutions which can, together with the help of the administration, make an anonymous analysis of personnel based on birthplace of the parents. And that is happening in some public institutions. But for private institutions, until now, we are not really doing that.
Thank you all for pitching in for this question. It was very interesting to hear the different perspectives. And now I would have one last question to wrap up this part on the corporate perspective in finance. I'm wondering, what diversity initiatives can we expect from KBC in the future?
Well, one of them I already revealed in the beginning, so I'm ending with that. It's a campaign we are going to do in November. We a little bit change the approach. It will be about unconscious bias. There is an e-learning connected to that, which we smart copied from Microsoft. Claire knows it. We have translated it. We have played the videos with internal staff, because this it was a professional videos in the e-learning from Microsoft. We were not allowed to copy those videos, so we just found some good actors in our staff, and we did the videos ourselves. We call ourselves Team Blue also internationally, so that's why you see Team Blue. We are not going to roll it out in 2020 in the whole company as a global campaign, because our employees, due to COVID, have been put into different e-learning still for strategy. So we are going to start with that based on request from certain managers in their management teams to roll it out. And then in 2021, it will become a more global campaign, and also the e-learning will be offered to all leaders in the whole company. And apart from that, we are not going to do too many new things, because we see that we have a lot of work to do still. So the key word here is focus. All managers have defined their action plans, not one big action plan, but very specific ones in their business. What I'm going to do is to follow them up and to report them every 6 months to the group exco. And they need to focus on moving the targets, not the targets, the ambition levels, as I said, into the right direction, and finding a better gender balance in all the leadership levels. So I think it's mostly focus and being consistent than rolling out every year new things, because then people get annoyed and they lose focus on the original action plans.
Thank you, Stefan, for your interesting insights. It was a truly nice discussion, and to hear what's happening at KBC. And
Okay.
Now I would like to give the floor to Noemi and Claire, who will talk, who will start a new discussion.
Thank you, Daniel. Claire, I have a question for you, but before that, I want to remind everyone that you can ask questions in the chat box, or you can save them for the Q&A session after this. So Claire, tell me, gender equality 2020, there's a lot of people who say, okay, we don't need it anymore. What would you answer these people?
No, that's really typical of the fact that when you are in a majority, you do not see the reality of a minority. It's really unbelievable. I had, for instance, in some sessions, like a people manager of a team of 15, in which he had like 3 women, and they were much at lower level, but with similar backgrounds. And he would tell me at the end of a presentation, yes, Claire, but in our team, we do not have any diversity issues. And you could see the faces of the females in his team falling like, I mean, come on, guy, don't you understand? And that's, in fact, we must know that it is not at all intentional, but most people who are in a position of privilege, they don't see this privilege. It's the same with white skin privilege. It's the same with male white skin privilege. It's something that you are born with. It opens some doors. It prevents you to have some doors closed, but you don't know it as long as nobody tells you. And so learning about it can really be interesting.
Yeah, so I presume that the reasons behind it are really complex, but why are women underrepresented in the financial sector? Are there any concrete reasons, or?
Well, it's. I must say that even after 10 years working on that, I'm not always sure of the combination, but clearly it's a combination of 2 homogeneous role models. And once you have a 2 homogeneous group of role models, then people will keep co-opting themselves. And they will keep unconsciously thinking, okay, I need to find a new director who looks like a director. And we have seen at some times in Europe and in the US, there were some research showing also that a guy taller, like 1.80 meter or 1.90 meter, not too fat, with large shoulders, was really a kind of unconscious image of leadership. I will never forget, for instance, one very senior banker. It was a leader inside an executive committee. We were discussing about leadership, and he told me, Claire, when you tell me leadership, I think about my time in the army. I was there with the guys and the tanks. And I was thinking, okay, so when you see me, probably you don't see leadership, because that's all this, unconscious image that you have formed. And so what I've seen during these 10 years is what is the fastest way to change, and it can change incredibly fast, is putting visible new role models in place and making them as visible as possible. As our first prime minister, which is a strong feminist, Alexander De Croo, very often says, you have to be careful with role models, because you don't want to put a perfectionist as a role model, like the person who is always perfect, works like 25 hours on 24, doesn't have kids, doesn't have a family, lives at the office. That is not someone to whom people can connect and think, okay, if she can do it, maybe I can. So, but really, I've seen in some places the whole dynamic of women starting to express their ambition, starting to climb the ladder, just in a matter of 6 to 12 months after the nomination of a new female role model. So I'm a strong believer that if you have that, and at the same time you have clear targets, or at least clear tools and encouragement to act, then some results may follow. Maybe not totally homogeneously, because it's not the same situation in all parts of banking.
It's a great answer you've given us. You've been involved with all this research around diversity, not just gender equality, for years now. And have you perceived any trends that really strike you compared to, for example, 10 or 5 years ago? What is better? What is worse?
Well, I would say what is much better is that if I remember when now it's nearly 12 years ago. So the discussions I had with some of the management teams, you still had, these dirty laughs just about, oh, we are talking about gender. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. And this you don't see anymore. I really think that once we have started to promote the notion of improving collective intelligence through a better mix, this really resonated with lots of leaders. And honestly, the 5-6 last years, it just happened in one executive committee of one small institution, and I will never, ever mention which one, that I thought, oh my God, I'm back 10 years ago. But that happily is really, really not happening in places now. So I would say definitely that's for the positive. Now for the negative, exactly as you said, there is always the risk to say, come on, it's already so many times we are working on it. That's what people call gender fatigue or diversity fatigue. People thinking, do we still need to work on this? I mean, it's like typically a company who will start with a gender program, actively talk a lot about it, not see much progress, but then the next year saying, okay, we've discussed gender, so this year we are doing something else. It's not like that it works, because it's really, I mean, if we know that we have these unconscious bias, all of us, that HR has them, that we as employees have them, that team leaders have them, well, then of course it takes a long, long time to progress.
Yeah. So Claire, when something sexist or a sexist decision is being made at the workplace, how should we react? Who do we report to? What should men and women actually do?
That's a very, very good question. I would say when we talk about sexist comments or possibly racist or homophobic, it's often about humor. So it will start like a joke. And I must say that in the survey that I did about multicultural inclusion in the sector, I received lots of free comments of colleagues of different origins about humor, saying, well, I feel like I'm forced to laugh together with the group, because if I'm not laughing, they will say, you don't have humor. We were just laughing. We are not racist. Or I'm just cracking again a joke about blondes, but you know me, I'm not sexist. And there is a simple rule that changes everything once it's really given from the top down, and it's to say, well, in humor or in comments, it's the receiver who gives the meaning. What does it mean? It means if I'm giving you a comment or I'm telling a joke, and of course I don't want to harm, if you say, well, look, I'm not feeling really okay with what you just said, my only possible reaction is to say, oh, sorry, I apologize. and we can laugh again on other topics later on. So, for instance, among the tools I want to promote beginning 21 to help the financial institutions to move, I think there is something to do about inclusive humor versus exclusive humor. I'm even thinking about improv sessions, so improvisation sessions, where people can understand really how it feels to be laughed about and feel a bit excluded, and how it feels to laugh together. Because in my experience, where I've heard the best possible humor, and I would not have expected that, was with colleagues with a disability when they were laughing together about their own disability. And you would say, oh, disability, that is a taboo. I don't want to laugh about disability. But actually, if you are together with disabled colleagues and you are all friends, they can laugh about it. And it's just so funny, so deeply funny and respectful. So that's a lesson I've learned about inclusive versus exclusive humor. But just maybe because it's a very important question you asked, I would also add that an important part is also to make sure that there is enough information inside each company about what's happening. My God.
Are you okay?
Sorry, my screen became black, so I thought, oh, there is I'm not there anymore. So my excuses for the expletives.
We see and hear you. No worries.
I'm still there. I was lost. So no, I was just saying it's so important to have this information about what can I do? Do I have the right to react? Is there someone to protect me? So I would say every company needs to have a zero tolerance policy explained by the CEO. And I discussed this with all the CEOs of the banks. And I'm happy to confirm also to Stefan that his CEO totally agrees and totally agrees with this idea of from top to the bottom, a very strong message about zero tolerance is essential. But then you also need to make sure that everyone knows, for instance, what we call the persons of trust, les personnes de confiance, vertrouwenspersonen. These are really special people which every big company needs to have, which can help you if you face any harassment, any unacceptable behavior. And definitely every company should advertise about who they are, what is the help online, possible immediate help. I mean, this is really important because we see also in the survey that people with a different visible origin tend to have less info about this than people from Belgian origin.
Yeah, I think you made really great points there. I have a question. It might be a little bit controversial, so I invite Stefan and Maya to think about it as well and to intervene, of course, if you have an opinion or a remark about this. But what do you think about quotas, whether it's on gender or on ethnicity? What is your opinion on that?
Well, my opinion goes back to the slide I showed you about the importance of gender mix and a sound mix in the decision process and just overall in efficiency of a company. And we know that, for instance, without legal quotas in boards, we would not have progressed at all. But if you think, what is the role of a board of directors? To challenge the direction of a company, to ask the good questions. And we know, and that has been proven many times, that a mixed board, a gender mixed board, will ask much more questions because women will not be afraid of saying, well, sorry, maybe I did not understand this point. Can you explain this to me? While some of the guys around the table think, oh, that's good. Maybe I will understand as well. So, I mean, I'm caricaturating a bit, of course. But I mean, it's so essential that a board does function properly and with real different perspectives, people able to understand different kinds of risks and not to fall into what we call groupthink, which is extremely dangerous. People tend to fall into groupthink and think just without any critical sense when the group is too homogeneous sometimes. So you see, quotas are just a powerful tool to make sure that your company moves towards something which is more professional. It's if we do not put these kind of tools, now I would just comment, you need to have what I call smart quotas, and that's a big difference. As Stefan has commented earlier, we do not want to say, for instance, to men, oh, we are sorry guys, but the 5 next years, only women will get promoted until we go to 50-50. That would be stupid and that would sacrifice a generation of talented people. We can't do that. But there are ways of putting smart quotas. I've had an experience with one which I can share very shortly. When I was responsible for diversity and inclusion at the time at BNP Paribas Fortis, we had an issue and we had seen that we had only 24% of branch managers who were women. And it was bizarre because when we looked at the pool of talents which had the right qualifications, we had precisely 50-50. When you have that situation, a smart quota is a quota on not on the stock, but on the moves. And what we decided with the management at the time was to say, well, look, as we see that we have 50-50 of the talents when we look just one level below, from now on, every year, we put a kind of, we called it a target because we thought it was already softer than a quota, but it was a quota, let's be frank. And this quota was to say half the new nominations need to be women. And we gave this quota to management and to HR. And indeed, year after year, for 4 or 5 years, we've reached that quota, and the global percentage moved from 24 to 43% in just 5 years' time. So that's an example of a quota which does not hurt anyone, because men were not angry. They understood that they got exactly as many chances.
Yeah, Stefan or Maya, do you have anything to add? I think you guys have a really important and interesting perspective on this, no?
I think one thing that I would like to add is the sentence or type of response that often comes to mind when you talk about quota from people is, oh, even from women themselves saying, I don't want to be chosen just because I'm a woman. I think when these tools are put in place, like the example Claire gave, there's a clear indication that the people who are being eligible to be picked within that quota already have the talent. So I think that that's something that makes it a more controversial word to use when people are saying, oh, you'll just be picked because you fill the main identifier. But of course, when there is a quota in place or a target or however it's called in a smart way or not, you've already reached that first benchmark of having the competences, you have the talent. So to me, it's not that controversial when you look at it from that way.
But you have a very good point, Maya, because when I started with working on targets, I got plenty of women coming to me and telling, Claire, I don't want to be part of that. I want to be chosen because I have the right talents. But I told them, and maybe that was harsh, but I told them, we do not put these quota in place to please you or to displease the guys. We want to have them to become more professional and to take together better decisions.
Yeah, from my side, I think I mentioned already our ambition levels approach, and it's exactly what you have already said. It's not a hard quotum because then it's counterproductive. To compare it with the board example of Claire, that's a different thing, of course, because with the board, you can virtually bring in anyone you want. So your choice is much broader in who you want to put or who you can put in a board. So you can choose virtually anyone. while in a company, a closed company or labor market as we are now, it's more difficult and everybody's fishing in the same pond somehow. But I think I already addressed the quotum part in the previous part, I think.
Great. Claire, Stefan, and Maya, thank you so much for your input. We will start a Q&A session. So for our audience, to give you more details about the technicalities, on Zoom you can raise your hand and we will see who was the first one to raise your hand, and we will unmute you so you can ask your questions directly to our speakers. So go ahead, raise your hands and ask your questions.
Hi, good evening. Can I selfie myself?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I have a question for all three speakers. Would you think that, speaking from a corporate point of view, do you think that the corporate sector has been taking the most effective steps towards the inclusion of diversity in the corporate culture, or do you think there are still many improvements in the methods that can be made?
Oh, if I'm answering your question, I would say, of course, we still are a long way. I mean, yes, it's good that what we have achieved now in 1.5 years, and I'm extremely proud of the results collectively achieved by a whole group of people, it's that at least on the table of direction of 90%, 90% of the financial sector, gender at least has been discussed. And it may be bizarre to you to think that just discussing, taking at least an hour to review the figures of a company of just half the employees, because basically in our sector, in most companies of our sector, we have 50-50, but just not evenly spread. And so I would say there is still a lot of progress to make sure that now we don't need to broaden so much. We have already reached 90%. We want them to go deeper, make sure that, I mean, when I see the plan of KBC, it's really a well thought plan, and I'm convinced that on gender, they will really continue progressing. Now, if they can also progressively, for instance, add a second focus on multicultural, it will of course help. And what I would like very much is encourage the whole sector to become more intersectional, not only focus on a box which would be gender. And I know KBC definitely does not work with one box, it's much more broader. But let's say that definitely on multicultural, we are just at the start. So we have launched a network to make sure at least that, for instance, in some smaller banks where you have a few bankers who feel really alone because being, for instance, the only Black banker or the only one from Asia or another country, the fact that they can join also the Multicultural Bankers Network, join a mentoring program in it also, it may help. But what we need is really a whole systematic work and on diversity and on inclusion. So we are just at the beginning.
I think if the question was, are the measures enough? No, there is a long way ahead, but you can look at the glass half empty or half full. But it all starts with the mindset. And there I agree with Claire. In every change, a big change, there is always a tough start. And then at a certain moment, you start seeing a tipping point. And from then on, it goes much faster. And I don't want to be over positive, but the typical bad examples you were seeing, I will not say how many years ago, is it 5, 3 or 2 or whatever, you don't see them anymore. And the fact that companies are addressing time, money and people on the topic as such, it's a very clear indication that we have reached a certain point of no return. How fast will it go forward? We don't know, but definitely not going backwards. Society is expecting it. External agencies are expecting it. Regulators are expecting it. So it's an evolution. You cannot turn back anymore.
Great, thank you. Stefan, we have a question for you in the chat, and I know some people don't see the raise hand button, so just feel free to write your question in the chat. So Stefan, someone asked if in KBC, all KBC in like the world, for example, if there's a KBC elsewhere, do all KBC places have their own diversity program, or is it harder in different ones?
I still have to mention one letter of pearl then. The L stands for local embeddedness, because we don't believe in the one size fits all, the global approach as a company. And we have countries in mainly Central Europe, and probably there are some participants also from Central Europe backgrounds. Every country has its own culture. And even Central Europe is not the right term, because every country in Central Europe has a totally different culture, and you can only know that if you look into that. So when we had a discussion at the group executive committee, one option was to indeed impose or similar campaigns and similar ambition levels in all the countries. And loyal to the L of Pearl, our exco said no, we want every country manager to set up their own program. And to give you one example, and you might disagree, but anyway, even the fact in certain countries to impose quota targets or ambition levels is counterproductive in countries which had a communist background. And I'm not inventing this, it was coming from the leaders of those countries themselves. They said, if you come with a target, with an obligation to get somewhere, based on our background and bad experiences with an authority telling us what to do, it will not work, because we are very clever. We will make sure we present you an image that you think we are doing it, but on the background, we will do just what we want. And that's exactly what we did in history as well, when we were imposed by others to do certain things. So we leave it, we leave the initiative to the countries, but still we are consolidating. We are keeping the finger on the pulse, but not as a controlling or monitoring department, but as a partner, as a community to share best practices and to learn from each other. So that's a little bit the way to approach it in our company.
Okay. There is another question for Stefan. I don't know if you see it, but
yeah,
what is the greatest achievement for KBC in terms of diversity?
It's my personal opinion, and I'm a quite, how to say, down-to-earth person. So I can't say, I don't see any great achievements to say like, oh, this is absolutely what we have achieved as a big thing. But every small step we are making is in the right direction. So maybe it's a contradiction to answer this. It's not the greatest achievement, but it's actually the step-by-step fact that whenever we go to an exco, to management, and we talk about the topic, we are not laughed at, we are not ridiculized. There is a good discussion, and we are not sent back with the idea like, oh, what have I been doing today? And I feel really bad about the reactions from people. So I would maybe in a contradiction say that's probably the greatest achievement until now.
Makes a lot of sense.
Are there any questions from our attendees? I don't think so. I think we'll wrap it up. Oh, no, there's still questions. Do all panelists see them, or should I read them out loud? Yes, you see.
So what achievements in Belgium stand out to you as being great for diversity? Well, I want to transform a little bit this question, if I'm allowed. So I would say not an achievement, but we are living in a country which is an unbelievably rich country with a whole diversity, not only on gender, origin, or sexual orientation, but also of languages. And I do believe a lot into the importance of linguistic diversity. So I would say, I don't think this country works enough building on the strengths of this language diversity. Because in most of our institutions in Brussels, definitely if you want to work in a bank in Brussels, you need to be basically trilingual and be able to start a conversation in Dutch and to move to French and to go back to English. And that's what most of us do. And that's great. That's good, because if we do not pay attention, there are also risks linked to linguistic groups, like having promoting clones of yourself, like you would say, I'm a man, so I'm seeking men. You may have also people totally unconsciously selecting people of the same linguistic group, that it is Dutch-speaking or French-speaking. You see that on both sides. And so there again, if we want to connect to the reality of our customers, having a sound mix of French-speaking and Flemish colleagues is absolutely fundamental. That makes us more clever as well. So I would say there's still an opportunity to improve on that. Sorry, I didn't answer the right question.
I find this a hard question to think of, because my mind immediately goes to maybe going above the level of a company itself. And then I feel like in Belgium, there isn't much that's holding companies to it. But that being said, I do think companies like KBC, BNP, within that atmosphere of, in Belgium as a whole, not much being done in terms of checks and balances, or more nudging. I think that certain companies are already doing a lot. So I think that in itself is good, that within the system they operate in, the attention is there, that it's important, and they're talking about it.
There are questions about quotas. I don't know if you have seen it. It's a question from Audrey. Clearly, some companies apply gender quota. Is it conceivable to apply it on an ethnic one? So does anyone have something to say about that?
Well, I asked the question to Stefan based on the barometer in terms of diversity, and if you could really put it in numbers, because it's something that I do wonder as well, if it's feasible, because it is, of course, a touchy subject, and you can't start asking someone on an application, okay, what's your heritage, because that might not come across very well. So as much as I think that sometimes measuring, and as is being done for the male-female balance or gender in a broader sense than just the binary, it's a hard one to measure, as was said. So I could not say. Claire?
It's complex. And on the same time, yes, you can't ask the people who apply to disclose their origin or race or ethnic category or whatever you want to tell. So personally, until now, my instinct has always been to make sure you are building concrete actions and that you are measuring through, for instance, anonymous surveys like the one we have done for the whole sector. I do believe that such an exercise should be done company by company to make sure about how good or how difficult is the experience of people in function of their origin, or you could ask them to disclose again on a totally anonymous basis, on a voluntary basis, to help them really to go forward, to help the whole company, I mean, to become more inclusive. But it is still complex indeed.
There has been a really interesting question raised about the exact measurements that have been set to keep diversity balance after recruiting. And it was specifically targeted to KBC. So Stefan, do you have anything to say about that? More details about the measurement?
Yes, just I want to understand the question properly, because it's like, what do we have set up, okay, to keep diversity balance after recruiting? Like there might be some cultural problems. So can you specify that? Because once you have recruited, and let's say we are diverse, what could happen that, which type of cultural problems are mentioned here?
Tina, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, I mean that, okay, we talk about diversity. We know that it's very important, but after that, we have taken it into account. We have recruited diverse people. Have KBS take any measurement into account to know what is best to deal with the diverse people? Because like 50 years ago, we only had men in high positions and men knew how to treat men. But now it is going toward a more diverse culture.
Mm-hmm.
So is it like an educational panel
Okay,
for?
okay, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. We have every half year we have a top 40 event where really the top of KBC, top 40 managers are coming together. And I think 1.5 years ago we have speakers from outside bringing inspirational things. And one speaker came there and we addressed really a whole morning on cultural differences, really the ethnic cultural differences, and also how people react based on their culture. It was very interesting because the top was already a diverse top, because it's international. So we addressed really that topic from that perspective. Having said that, on a lower level, as a standard leadership training, we don't have something like that because as I said, we are not recruiting specifically on different cultures in all environments. So there, it's less part of a training program for leaders to have it standardized. But there are options for leaders to follow courses and understanding better why certain people react in a certain way given their cultural backgrounds. So would I call it a special program? I don't think that would be the right word, but do I address it here and there in training initiatives? Yes.
I've seen 3 questions from Dina, from Kat, and from Janatul. So maybe very quickly, the question from Dina about women getting interrupted, for instance, in STEM, as you had seen a kind of a viral video about this, I would talk about solidarity. We have seen, and that is known since the beginning of the Obama era, very surprising, that women indeed, even in very healthy circles, tend to be less heard, tend to be less listened to when they speak. And so being or a woman or one who becomes conscious of this phenomenon, you can act. So my advice is definitely solidarity. Not only solidarity among women, like indeed the female counselors of the Obama era had organized between themselves, like if one had expressed an idea and it was not really listened to by the men around the table, the second one would again take this first idea saying, as Barbara was saying, I believe as well that, and the third one would do, as long as people didn't stop and listen, indeed. So solidarity, definitely, it's something on which we must train people. Solidarity also for everything about microaggressions, help people to understand that there might be problems. That was for this question. And then there are 2 questions which we can connect a little bit. I see the question of Kat about what do you think is the biggest problem? Women not being confident enough to grow to positions or not being given the opportunity? It's always very tricky, but I would say it's all about the mix that you see when you look upstairs. If you look at the highest level and the mix that you see or the values or the way they are working does not represent how you would like to work, then it may be an issue and you may not be able to connect. And we have seen very often that all of a sudden, when one person is changing and all of a sudden there are different kind of values in that management team, then the women dare to apply. And so I think one of the key messages to women when you want to attract them is to say, well, look, we know that you have the right competencies. These are the ultimate goals, and you can reach them the way you want. So you don't have to copy the way other people are doing. And this is also answering for a part the question of Janatul, which is a very pertinent question about work-life balance. Work-life balance is, of course, an issue. It is true that today in our society, women do more chores. They have more time together with the kids. And we hope that with new measures like the ones this government has in project to double the father leave, the paternity leave, that it will also progressively reduce differences on course, but it is a long story, of course. But definitely, if we allow women to say, well, look, you just concentrate on the essentials. If you take that role, you do not necessarily have to attend evening events at Anderlecht every evening. You just make sure that you are progressing. And if you want to delegate people to certain roles, do so. Then you open the doors. So sometimes it's just expressing that they have freedom as long as they reach the goals you are expecting.
Thank you so much. There's just one last question before we wrap it up real quick. A question from Divya when it comes to cultural diversity. It seems to be that Asians are put together. How can one address this actually?
So I don't know if that was also referring to the graphs that I showed where you had like obviously some answers from Black participants, North African or Asian. It's always, of course, tricky when you are proposing to in a survey and you want to understand what kind of origin have the people. We know that this is not detailed enough. So, I mean, probably we were not far enough for that, but I can't say much. What we have seen is that indeed some colleagues from Asian origin, for instance, especially Chinese colleagues, were received more racist microaggressions due to the virus. So as simple as that, if we listen to Donald Trump saying each time on purpose the China virus, this is a way of putting the responsibility systematically on China. This is not respectful, of course. So there are different lives. Maybe also you could address the situation of Indian colleagues, which are very often filling half an IT department, for instance, and sometimes not feeling really included, or maybe not very connected. So how do you cope with that? So there are lots of challenges ahead. And certainly the goal we have with the Multicultural Bankers Network, which is open towards absolutely all colleagues, of course, also certainly the Belgian colleagues from Belgian origin, is also to be able to progressively connect with those groups as well.
Great.
I don't know if
I hope so. Thank you so much. I will give now the word to Keike, a member of Capitant, for our last word before we wrap this webinar up.
So with this Q&A session, we're reaching the end of our online panel discussion, and we would like, however, to take this opportunity to thank every attendee who participated tonight. We would like to thank on behalf of Capitant Brussels, Corporate Women's Association, and Binabi. We really hope that attendees found the topics that we discussed interesting and engaging, and that you attend future events organized by our societies. And also, please don't forget to visit our society's social media so you can keep up to date with our future events and activities. And last but not least, we would also like to thank our three panelists for accepting to participate in our event. It really means a lot in providing us with valuable insights in the topic of diversity in finance. And with that being said, we wish everyone to stay safe and looking forward to having every one of you in our future events. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And this wraps it up. You guys can, yeah, tag us on your pictures, post them on Instagram, Facebook, whatever.